Okay, thanks everyone for coming. For those of you I don't know, I am Claudia Flores, the director of the International Human Rights Clinic here at the law school. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest in our lunchtime talk today. I'll call him Professor, I hope he doesn't mind, Emilio Álvarez Icaza Longoria. He's the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. And I think most of you know that that is the sort of predominant international human rights body of the Organization of American States. That is important to us here in this region because the United States is subject to its jurisdiction to some extent, and also because it monitors and it promotes human rights in our region. Emilio was a professor in the Department of Social Sciences at the National University of Mexico. He's been the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights since 2012. Before that, he served in many prominent leadership positions, both as an academic and also in civil society. He's author of the book To Understand Human Rights in Mexico, which is where he's originally from. And he also was the ombudsperson or the president of the Commission of Human Rights in the Federal District in Mexico. I think Emilio, as the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission, provides a very unique perspective because his background is as a member of civil society. And so I think today, in addition to just a general sense of how the Inter-American Commission works and its challenges and the things that have worked well and the things that haven't and its priorities, he'll be able to give us a really good sense of some of the ways that the Commission does and does not effectively promote human rights in the region, how civil society in different countries have been able to use the Commission to promote sort of on-the-ground efforts to promote human rights, and what are some of the ways that he can see improvement in that area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emilio.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Claudia says, my name is Emilio. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission. I'm very happy to be here. Not exactly this weather. It's a little cold. Even I've been in DC about 3 years and a half. But even for us, but I'm very happy. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Susan, also to invite me. It's a great honor to be here. I came also with Susan 3 years ago, or something like that. No? We want to talk a little bit about the Commission, what are we doing in the Americas, and also we want to focus a little bit what are we doing in the United States, because the Inter-American Commission is the most active international human rights body in the United States. And if you are going to work in this field, maybe it's something that you can use in the future as an extra tool. It could be useful for you. Some people is using, and we want to look about it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the mandate. The Commission is one of the main bodies of the OAS, the Organization of American States. In some short words, it's like United Nations for the Americas. That's the OAS. It's an organization made by states, 35 state members. In 1948, decided to come together. Since then, the states decided that human rights became one of the main issues, the hardcore of the organization. So the Commission started at that time, in 1948. So that means that the Inter-American Commission is one of the oldest human rights bodies in the world. Even we started before some UN bodies. And in the region, we've been working in that. The Commission has these three pillars: protection, monitoring, and promotion. And during the time, those same mandates has been changing the time. And in the first time, if we can say so, the challenge is to talk about what do we think about human rights. So the states and civil society came together and established the conventions. In the time that is based on a concept which is progressivity. It has changed in the time. We came with the American Convention on Human Rights, and then different treaties about civil and political rights, social and economical rights. By the time there were new challenges. For example, the Convention regarding violence against women, Belém do Pará, which is such a paradigmatic worldwide. It's one of the main conventions about, and some others. For example, regarding dictatorships, we have to fight effectively what's going on in Latin America. So, unfortunately, we discovered the concept of forced disappearances. At that time, there were no convention about that. So we have to fight legally against that practice. But there were no convention. So the states came after that time. And now we have the Inter-American Convention against forced disappearances. We have some other regarding torture, and some. We have 11 different, which complements UN conventions. So different levels of involvement in the states regarding regional and universal system. So the commission been changed during the time, the agenda has been changed during the time. And the mandate on these 3 pillars also changed. As I mentioned, we have 35, including Cuba. And Cuba is a very interesting case, because during the Cold War, the organization expelled Cuba, we can say so. And in 2009, under Brazilian President leadership Lula, the OAS readmitted Cuba. But Cuba never denounced the American chapter, the OAS chapter. So under the OAS consideration, under the Commission consideration, we have mandate on Cuba. So we make certain research on Cuba. The Commission grants precautionary measures on Cuba. We make every year a report on Cuba. And even we have hearings from people coming from Cuba, people coming directly from the island or people living outside of Cuba, and monitoring human rights. We are one of the most active bodies in Cuba, and some other in the region. The Commission is, as I said, one of the most important things is the autonomy and independence. We have 7 commissioners elected by the General Assembly, and they do not represent the states. They are there in their own personal capacity. Some of them come from the academia, professors, teachers, some of them from civil society, or some of them lawyers. But when they became commissioners, they are acting as individuals, not as a state representative. These are the 7. I tried to make it easier, so you have to find the number, so you know where they come from. So this is a very interesting case because we have all the region. For example, the president, which is James Cavallaro, he comes from the United States. He is now in Stanford. He directs he's the director of the Clinic on Human Rights in Stanford. The vice president is a Mexican, which is this guy, Jesus Orozco. He used to be a judge. Now he's a professor in the UNAM, which is the National University, in the Investigaciones Jurídicas. How do we sell that? Investigaciones Jurídicas? Law Institute. No? And Pablo Banucchi is this one. He comes from Brazil. He used to be the Human Rights Minister of Lula. He's been working with unions for almost 30 years. And then we have Margaret Macaulay. She's from Jamaica. She's a very particular case because first she served at the Inter-American Court. So now she is going to be a commissioner. So now she's going to work in both bodies of the system, the court and the commission. That's a unique case, that someone who's been as a judge now is serving as a commissioner. And then we have Esmeralda, which is from Panama, Francisco, which is from Peru, and Gil Botero. Those are the 7 commissioners. Margaret, Esmeralda, Francisco, and Enrique, they just started this January. They have 4 years period, and you can have an extra 4 if there are conditions if you want to, and the state decide to. So, but that means that we have a new majority, a new commission, which is a challenge for us. because they have to start learning the rules, the procedures, the dynamic. They come to Washington 7 weeks a year. They live in their own country. They work as they have to. Most of them, as I mentioned. And my job is to coordinate a staff, about 75 people, including fellows. We have about 50. Maybe one of you want to be a fellow in the future, or interns. We have a very aggressive program, and it's a really good program. You will see it. So what we try to do is when we try to work, one of our main focus is trying to work with victims. One of the things that we used to do is to receive cases, complaints from those countries that we have mandate. When the national remedies do not work, when there is a problem of impunity, when there is lack of justice, so they came to the Commission. They need to end local remedies to come to the Commission. And they have 6 months period time in those circumstances. So one of our main focus is how do we work with victims. Some of them, we use this standard of very severe human rights violations, so regarding questions of dictatorship times and some others. The second is the question of efficiency and due process of law. There is a big challenge in the region, not only in Latin America, but also in the United States and Canada. For example, we made an investigation about indigenous women murdered and disappeared in British Columbia, and the whole thing is going on. We produced a report on that. And we also had this question, how do we enforce, if we can say so, if we have no tooth? No, because we're more like a moral institution. We depend on the agreement, on the volunteer of government, but also how civil society use the Commission. So both things. No? It is an extra tool, if we can say so. So as I was mentioned, one of the main ideas is independence, because we find out very often this case of double speech. No? They say, referring to the governments, oh, what human rights we support. Very, very severe. We will work in human rights no matter what happens. And when we came in the case, they start fighting, refusing, and they do not attend. And that's something really sad, because people wait from time to time many years for justice. And even when they won, they still have to fight for that. And that happens local, national, at the international level. It's not only a challenge that we have. It's almost the same everywhere. And that's why we need independence and autonomy. Because if not, the commissioners will follow what the government wants them to say. So that's a key issue if you are going to work on human rights. From time to time, somebody has to say something. And it's in certain question regarding the conception of human rights, it is quite a political thing, not partisan, but talking to the state, saying, you should not do this, you should do this. That's a political thing. So the states became very sensitive about it. And that's why we need independence. And also the question is the kind of things that we need for promotion and protection of human rights. So the impact, this is the budget that we worked with last year. It's about $10 million. That's a cut September. Half of our budget comes from the OES. And that's when you start showing the numbers. they say we are a priority, but we are a 6% priority. That's the budget of the OES for the Commission. So then you start, when you saw the numbers, the budget reflects priorities. That's bottom line. So this thing, 6% of the organization. The court, 3%. So we represent 9% of the budget. And they say we are a priority. Thanks God. This specific fund is regarding contributions, specific contribution for state members or non-state members, observers, mostly European countries. And that's a challenge. For example, we receive stronger contributions from some European countries than from some Latin American countries. And those are the state members. When you saw the numbers, something is wrong. And those are the ones, these are the good guys. Those out of the list, they even not give us a penny. Those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means 20% of the state members. So when you check the numbers, and why this is important? Because if you have more budget, you have more lawyers. You have more cases. You have more visits. If you have not, your capacity is slower. That's when we start saying, do you really serious? Do you really matter human rights? And when you saw the numbers, that's the kind of challenge that we have. Last year, we received about 2,200 petitions. Our frequent clients, if we can say so, we have some platinum, gold, and some extra. No? Very preferred guest, Mexico, with 800. No? That's a platinum. No? And then we have Colombia, and then we have Argentina and Peru. No? And there are different reasons for that. Maybe the Commission is, we have different levels of involvement and knowledge about what's going on with this system. We have this we have about a backlog of 7,700. We just reviewed this year. We said that we need a harder strategy. That's why we started working with fellows and with some interns because of this program. And we have such a good result with this. These are the cases that we present before the court. And then you can see from those 2,000 that we received, only 20% came to the Commission. 80%, for different reasons, they don't come in. But we are the door to the court. And as you can see, the numbers are totally different. From 2000, 23 in this case. The court is almost similar than us. They are based in San Jose de Costa Rica. And they came together between 8 and 14 weeks a year. It's not as the European court, which is a permanent court with 42 judges. In this case, there are 7, and almost the same as the Commission. These are the countries, the cases that last year we presented. Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, Ecuador. And there are different kind of reactions. Sometimes, for example, Peru and Guatemala, most of the times, they do not accept the international responsibility. So in those cases, the Commission sent directly the case before the court. As lawyers used to say, see you in the court. No? You don't care? Okay. And in some other cases, it depends on the way that they are doing. The Commission presents a merits report with the conviction about a human rights violation. And if the state is answering to that, it takes some time to take the case before the court. If not, as I mentioned, Peru, it's the best example. For different reasons. From time to time they say, we have not a law that gives us the opportunity, for example, for economical reparation. So if we do that, we're going to be persecuted by our attorney. So we need a sentence. So with this sentence, we can pay. It's something ridiculous, but it happens. And we will say it could be useful to have a law that allows you to pay. Yes, but that's Congress matter, and you know how the Congress work. No? So I need a sentence. So that happens in Peru, for example. We have another tool, which is precautionary measures. Is to do something immediately. It's asking the government to protect journalists, human rights defenders, even people in the death row, or some others. So we received this kind of request. It's a very extraordinary tool. Just 45 of those, almost 700, the Commission just granted 45, which is such an exceptional measure. If the Commission, normally, the Commission decides to ask for some information, that's a kind of signal. From time to time, that's enough to take some action. But regarding, for example, journalists, or regarding human rights defenders, even judges, maybe you hear about the case of Rios Montt in Guatemala. Such an important case. The judges came to the Commission asking for protection because they were under threat. So they were looking for international protection. And we are talking about judges. That's the cases, the kind of cases that we have. This, of course, we come again to our frequent and platinum clients. In this case, Mexico, Venezuela, what's going on in Venezuela regarding human rights defenders, and Honduras. No? What's going on about human rights defenders there, it is very critical. We have very active, as much as we can, press and communication office, sending messages. No? And that's something for civil society is very useful. When something is happening, they want to send them an alert signal what's going on. So they send information to the Commission. The Commission start looking for, and the Commission present the press releases. From time to time, governments it's much more aware of this than a case. Because that's the public debate. So when the Commission came in the national media saying something, they really get mad. It is very usual that I receive phone calls from capitals. Why did you say this? They do care really about what's going on in the debate. And we start changing using social media. And it's really such a very good example. Last time, we went to Mexico last October. And by the first time, we had something like a social media reporter with us. 6.5 million people connected to the visit. Twitter, Facebook, Flickr. It was such a big impact. We used to produce a report, 3,000, maybe 5,000. And now we are using this, and we have 6 million people. That's when the government really get angry, no? And some others. So we are trying to move to that kind of experience, and I think it is something really useful. If some of you want to receive the information, you can get into the website and you can subscribe. If you want to receive information on a particular country, you are going to Argentina and you want to know what is going on in Argentina, maybe you can receive. Or if you are working in your research, your thesis or something, there's a place where you can get some information. And even if you are looking for a fellowship, you can subscribe. It is very useful. It is very useful. You can use it. Now we have this portal, which the people can directly send the information. They don't need to come to Washington. They just send the information directly. And that's a totally different change. We just started last year, and that will change for sure. Because now we can send electronically the information to the States. They don't need to come. And this is a totally different time. As I mentioned, we have public hearings twice a year. That means that in March and in October, we have public debates about particular topics on human rights. People from 20 to 25 countries came to DC to talk about, for example, different topics of their own countries. We will see some examples about the United States. We have country visits. This one is in South Texas, when the crisis of children travel alone. So we visited the border. And some others, this is regarding, we have a hearing about young people in prisons with adults. The United States is having a huge trouble. 200,000 young people together with adults. And it's totally against international standards. Just to give you a brief idea. And because of that hearing, we made some visits to different places in the States and some other countries. We went to Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Canada, the mission that I talked about, indigenous women in British Columbia. We went to Mexico last October. Maybe you hear about the crisis in the border about Venezuela and Colombia, that Venezuela started deporting people. So we went to the border. We asked the Venezuelan government to give us permission to get in. We couldn't, so we just visited Colombia. But we sent that kind of, shame on you. You are talking about human rights and you didn't let us come in. This is the kind of report that we want to produce. We presented Dominican Republic report last week. This week we're going to present Honduras, and Mexico and Guatemala is next. Those of you that works in these particular topics, this could be very useful. And the Commission also works in certain kind of standards. If we can say regional standards. These thematic reports we use as a way of launching information. Different topics, and you can find, and we use more like a tool of public policy regarding human rights. So we try to work with the judicial branch, with civil society, even with faculties, try to move in this kind of standards. That's when we talk about the United States, those are the main issues that we receive from the United States. Due of process and death penalty. And we have a strong battle for the United States about this. Because most of the time, the state of Texas do not pay many attention. We're still fighting all the time. And there's a lot of action in precatory measures. Until today, that's a very good example that if you're going to work on human rights, you're going to need a lot of tolerance to frustration. Because from time to time, it's like you are hitting the wall. But by the time, that process makes some changes. So we are insisting, those are very good examples, the kind of things that we have to insist. We have about 500 cases from the United States. Many reports, 25 come from the United States. And as I said, more of them regarding death penalty. And it is, we try as much as possible to work with government, not against government. But from time to time we have to go out on public. And we say, if you want to talk about human rights all over the world, which is it's okay. You want to talk about human rights in Syria, you want to talk about human rights, what's going on in Paris, you want to talk about in Uganda, it could be a good idea to pay attention at home, which is moral authority. And nowadays, human rights respect became an indicator of democratic governance. So if you want to talk about what's going on outside, you should pay attention inside. That means coherence. And from time to time, many groups use this as a cornerstone, to push the local government or the federal government what they're talking about. And that's, in my opinion, one of the most powerful tools of human rights. When you speak about what you want to do, coherence, and talking about democracy. We have different thematic hearings. People ask for different. We will have some in April, 3 or 4 thematic hearings from the United States. Let me give you some example. She is the mother of Trevor Martin. She came to the commission, and they give us such a very good example about the debate of stand your ground laws. So they presented a very good report about what's going on in those 14 states with this kind of law. Not only the case, but the structural approach about that. It was such a very good hearing. This is something that I really was on shock, because this is Guantanamo, public defenders. And it was really fascinating because we have, this is the petitioner's table. It's not the state table, the petitioners. So we have soldiers in front of soldiers. I have no chance to put the other table, which is the state. So by the first time, public defenders paid by the army came to the commission to talk those guys in front of them what is going on about human rights violations in Guantanamo. That's the kind of things that we can do as an international body in the States. In fact, we launched a report you will see about Guantanamo. But this kind of picture is so unusual. When I saw the petitioner's delegation, somebody's moving. It is not usual to get a picture of this in some Latin American country. Not really. So it was, and this is a hearing, Black Lives Matter. It was such a powerful hearing. So this kind of debates came to the commission. So for some people who's connected with civil society, non-governmental, non-profits, they use this as a tool. Susan came to the commission several times. She's also our client. But because it's another window. If you are doing advocacy, if you want someone to pay attention, and last Saturday, we went to an exhibition, a memorial, the victim of tortures in Chicago. They use the commission for that case.
In 2005, with the Burge cases that have just been resolved by City Council. But our first international venue was the commission.
And maybe some of you hear about the Jessica Gonzalez Lenahan case. Jessica Lenahan. She came to the commission to talk about her case. So in those cases, the commission is also a very powerful tool. Those are the kind of reports that we present. Immigration. And this is the case of refugees and migrants in the United States and unaccompanied children. We just launched that last October. And this is Guantanamo. Only 7% of those people sent to Guantanamo come from Iraq. Only 7%. 93% come from 41 countries. There is a micro website regarding this report that will be very useful for you to visit. And we want to finish some of the challenges. We have different levels of involvement in the system. Of 35, just 7, which means 20%, 2 out of 10, recognize all the human rights regional conventions. That means that we still have to work in many states. The United States is one of the, how can we say? Well, there is a lot of room to improve. We really need it. So when we talk about universalization, we have different levels of approach. Compliance, the level of compliance. This is our office in Washington, and this is the court in San Jose de Costa Rica. In some cases, mostly when the transitional justice is working, there are a lot of support. When there is some government with a lot of troubles on human rights violations, and they're refusing to do something, another way of reflecting that attitude is with international bodies. They mostly use the same. They do not pay attention nationally or internationally. Those are some of the challenges that we have. Insufficient financing. We are, in certain way, victims of our success, because as much as the people knows the Commission, there are more petitions. Supposedly, that's a good sign. Supposedly. But when you have not enough capacity to answer, that becomes a serious challenge. How do we monitoring the situation if they do not allow us to come in? For example, Cuba, Venezuela, now Ecuador. They're talking about human rights, but they do not really work in the international human rights monitoring. They do not allow us. That's a challenge. And the opposite, you found out some states very cooperative. Even the United States, if we ask for some visit, Mexico or Argentina or Colombia. So that's really a challenge. Decrease of thematic reporterships. That means that there are new agendas. For example, we have now LGBTI reportership. But now older people, what we want to do with that, or what's going on about trafficking, or what's going on about, how you say, discapacidad? Disabilities. There is a whole new agenda, and it is not easy to work with those if you have not the resources. The promotional activities, and in some clients, as I said, they do not pay attention very often to our decisions. So this is just an approach. If you need more information, that's the place that you can find out. And we are not far away. And if you need something, if you are working with some case, the Commission could be a tool. But the most important thing is human rights is like trying to accelerate democratic process. That's the main issue that I want to send you as a message. The Commission is just another tool. If you are going to work in this field, the best idea is do something but connect with other agendas, nationally and internationally. So your case could be a paradigmatic one, looking for the non-repetition. And in that particular situation, it is very useful. Because so you connect this case with a whole process. So if you're going to work in this field, do not forget the long term. Do not forget there is somebody with the same kind of challenge here or in some other place. So thank you very much.
We have 15 minutes for questions.
Yes.
The newspaper La Jornada quoted you as saying that the kidnapping of Central Americans in Mexico and the extortion of money from their relatives here in the U.S. and back in their countries was a billion-dollar business. Now, is the IACHR, the FBI, the U.S. State Department, and the Mexican authorities doing anything to try to track these remittances from the families to the kidnappers? And is there any chance of ending this?
I've been talked this several times with Mexican authorities, and it's something, what's going on is something unacceptable. As a Mexican, I really feel so bad what's going on with Central Americans in Mexico. And I made some interviews in different places in Mexico, in bordering in Chiapas, in Tabasco, even in Saltillo. And I found out that many people that come from Guatemala, Honduras, they've been kidnapped. And the narcos, or wherever you want, they torture them to get a phone number. I made an interview in Saltillo with 2 Honduranians and a Salvadorian. They took away, how do you say, uñas?
Nails.
Nails. They took away the nails. The boy that I was interviewing, he has just 3. And I saw another guy without anyone. That's the way that they get the number. The National Commission on Human Rights talk about 10,000 cases every 6 months. So that means that a lot of money comes from Central America to Mexico. And even from relatives here in Chicago, in LA. Can they follow that money? Research? Because those are digital transactions. You just need to follow the money. It is not acceptable. I have an interview with a woman. The testimony that she gave us. And you present the case information, and they do not investigate. They have the information. Even the base, the train. They've been asking for security. And now they have security. You know why? Because they do not allow the migrants to get into the train. By the first time, last year, Mexican authorities deported more Central American people than the United States. And that is not for protection. That's because what's happening in the crisis in the border here with children coming along. So that kind of things are not acceptable. And the Commission presented a report on that. We're still waiting the answer.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So when you're coming up with topics for reports, can you talk a little bit more about the process of that process of choosing topics, and what is it like? Is there something that it's typically a response to, or is it?
There are different kind of, depending, for example, the country that they come from and the kind of involvement of the country, because there are different kind of conventions. So when they came to the commission, when they present a petition, we start analyzing the petition, and there are different groups, if social and political rights, economical and cultural rights, and regarding the country. If there are legal conditions, we accept, and then we start the process. We ask the government to answer, and we ask the petitioners to bring information. Once that we analyze, if we have the conclusion that there is a human rights violation, we came out with a merit report. So the process takes some time, 3, 4, 5 years. I hope that at the end of this year, it will reduce to 1 year, 1.5 years. Because it's so sad when you do not have answer in your country, and the international instance you have no answer to. And that's why we push in the government to give us more resources. So that's one of the main challenges. Do I answer?
There was a question.
Sure. So you said together the court and the commission make up about 9% of OAS's budget.
Mm-hmm.
What's the other 91%?
They have some, for example, development, about 20%. It comes from the past. They used to have some kind of projects, development. It's like a little bank for some countries. But nowadays that we have the Inter-American Bank or the CAF or some others, it is much better than us. But from some Caribbean countries, it's better to use this way to get some funding, some support. There are some other there is a program in the region for scholarships, and there is some questions regarding security, counter-terrorism. There is a commission against terrorism, and some others. The OAS has a staff about 900 people. We are employees 60. So it's almost the same number.
Emilio, before we take another question, I wonder if you can just clarify a little bit, since we're here with law students, what the states that are members of OAS and are signatories to the convention and to the declaration, what their legal obligations are in relation to the commission and to the court.
If a state decides to sign a declaration or a convention, it becomes an international duty. So it's in some states, it is added in their constitution that becomes a law. In some countries, there are 3 kinds of categories. And this is the constitution. Some took the human rights body on the top. Some take at the same level, and some decide that the Constitution is the main juridical corpus. So the Human Rights Convention body is just a little bit down the Constitution. So regarding this approach, we found out different kind of answers. They should answer. If they do not answer, they do not respond, we look for different tools. Okay, you do not answer, so we're going to produce a report. You don't, for example, we ask for information, we take that denounce as true. You refuses to collaborate, okay, we send you to the court. So there are certain kind of consequences. And even, for example, what is going on with Texas in death penalty. We take that information to United Nations. So we bring that information. And we know that in United Nations, some other countries will take that information against that particular state. So when the state came out talking about human rights, somebody, hey, wait a minute. You have this, and this. So we try to use this as a tool for international, United Nations or international community.
So I've been working with a territorial government in Nicaragua of Afro-descendants and indigenous peoples who are facing the impacts of the proposed canal through southern Nicaragua. And in that case, one of the parts of it that interests me is the fact that the state of Nicaragua has completely accepted the obligation to consult with the peoples, the indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples. They've signed Convention 169, and yet they claim to have obtained consent in clear violation of international norms. And I wonder if you think the Commission going forward will be taking cases that further define the conditions that are necessary to call something through prior and informed consent.
We already have a hearing about that. I went to Managua about three or 4 months ago, exactly to talk about human rights and indigenous communities. About there is a conflict coming. The way that the Nicaraguan government is facing this is a bed for conflict, because it looks like no matter how, no matter what, they want to do it. And there is such a big discussion about, in different levels, talking about corruption, talking about land, talking about indigenous communities, talking about environmentalists. If they do not pay serious attention on the previous consultation, they will have a trouble. They will, in my opinion. And certainly the Commission will follow this, because that will be one of the main issues in Nicaragua. Because they are using the police to stop the protest. So now we have a discussion about use of force. They want to use the judicial branch as a way to stop the leaders. So now we are analyzing the rule of law and the criminalization of human rights defenders. So the way they decide, that will be the answer for this purpose. That it is increasing the tension notably.
All right, one more question, Dylan.
So we talked about, and just a corollary to Professor Flores' question about, and it's referenced specifically to the ratification of conventions, because my understanding is that the United States hasn't ratified any of the conventions, right? Correct?
The American Declaration of...
Right, the declaration, but not the conventions underneath it. But I'm wondering about your experience both in civil society, as a professor and on the commission. What have you seen as like the most effective ways to promote and get countries that have signed the declaration but haven't ratified the conventions to actually ratify the conventions to be held to the international standards that those promote?
The best time in the United States was when, for example, Carter was president, because he signed the American Convention, but the Congress do not. No? So now we are facing the main challenge, as you know, not only in this particular matter, in some others, in the Congress. No? The U.S. Congress became quite dysfunctional. No? And human rights is not an exception for that. So that's the kind of example where the pressure, the civil society action, the university action, is needed. Because we can't let them alone. No? It is too serious to let them alone. They need some help. So in some cases, when there is a change of government, that's when human rights go faster. Because they want to show some political concern. They want to show some political will. They want to show that they are different. In that particular time, this is an opportunity window to push for example, now in Canada, I just went to Ottawa to talk to the government. You are sending this and this and this and these measures. What's going on about the American Convention on Human Rights? We even couldn't talk about this with Harper government. They refusing. At least they are hearing us. But the Commission is more, we have more impact where there are a national actor, where the civil society at the national level is stronger. We come from outside. We are a tiny team in Washington. We have some power to do some things, but where the international and the national process is connected, we go faster. So in those countries with the national human rights movement, we have a deeper impact. So that means that we are an extra tool. From time to time, we help. We can make the process faster. But that depends on the national actors.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much, Emilio.